I love double-sized comic books. I love double-sized first issues, final issues, anniversary issues, second to last issues. What a treat.
Live from the Talking Joe Studios.
The last issues from him, an arc called Dawn of the Red Shadows. Brandon Jerwa's era's ending, a finale with the Red Shadows.
Hey everybody, it's me, Dr. Mark, and welcome to another episode of Talking Joe, the best and longest running dedicated G.I. Joe comics podcast, featuring three people being recorded in 2022, mostly about Red Shadows. So I'd like to be specific. If you are new to the show, you can find out all of the details over at the website. The website is talkingjoe.co.uk. Now we are continuing our look at the Disavowed era of G.I. Joe with issue 42, Dawn of the Red Shadows, part 1 from Devil's Due in May 2005. It is the penultimate issue from Brandon Jerwa's run. So digging into this with me, as always, it's my co-host, it's a real American Tim, it's Tim Finn.
Hello, Mark, and hello, listeners.
Hello, Tim. But before we start gabbling on too much, we've got a special guest with us today. It is friend of the show. You might know him from our... I know, Tim, you know his name anyway, but for the listeners may know his name from the Golden Joes episodes that he has appeared on. It is Richard Straw. Hi, Richard.
Hello, Mr. Mark. Hello, Mr. Tim. Very pleased to be here and looking at this very strange issue of G.I. Joe.
We're getting into it already. Richard, where are you physically located at the time of recording?
I am in my sister's house in the northeast of England because we are having a Halloween party. So there's some interesting things going on in the house, but they promise not to bother me.
Now, I haven't been to England in several years, and I assume it's very small and everyone knows everyone and can get everywhere easily. Were you also at that show that Mark attended a few days ago?
No, I don't think I was. But no, I don't think I was. I wasn't. Would that be something at the opposite end of the world?
That was something in London. So,
oh, good Lord, that's like a million miles away.
Yeah, so sort of, I guess for the American audience, everything is kind of in relation to distance from London. So how far are you north of London, Richard?
Oh, Lord, how far Newcastle is? Newcastle upon Tyne. I mean, Bill Blyton once said that nowhere is actually very far from anywhere in Britain, but we are a good 300 miles or something, which isn't anything at all, really, but feels like a huge amount when you're in the northeast of England.
Yeah. In England, anything over an hour is a long way away. Very long way. Ooh.
And Mark, by comparison, how many hundreds of miles are you from London?
I am I'm about an hour and a half drive from London.
Okay. And there was some G.I. Joe stuff to look at what was the show called?
It was MCM, but by the time this comes out, that would have been ages ago.
Well, then let's skip it. You saw some toys that people have already seen pictures of on the internet. All right,
exactly.
Good. Issue 42, Devil's Due.
So, Richard, I don't know if we talked too much about this on the Golden Joes episode, but I mean, part of the reason that we're doing this at all, talking about the Devil's Due era, is because of the enthusiasm of people like you who look back on this era with a great, what's the word I'm looking for?
Nostalgia. I just look upon it with great affection.
Affection, thank you.
In a way that probably most fans do.
So, what is it about this particular era that you enjoy and look back so fondly?
I mean, the thing that I said, I think at the time, and I'll say it again, was that I obviously came to G.I. Joe being from the UK via the medium of Action Force. Action Force is what G.I. Joe wishes it was. Wow.
Shots fired.
We'd only really had we'd had quite a lot of Larry Hama's comics, but I'd only read them through the British reprints, and so there was no sense of a long continuity or any of that. And I came across a random comic in a comic shop I used to go to in around 2000 when it started, and it just reminded me of that. And to me, this was G.I. Joe is the Devil's Due era, because that's the thing that I really read through and collected from the start. And I actually came to reading the Larry Hama stuff as a proper run through much, much later. And so maybe I wasn't making any comparison. So to me, weaknesses, issues, all the sort of things that you've raised, yeah, I can see what you mean about them. But to me, this was G.I. Joe when I was, well, not when I was growing up, but when I was sort of rediscovering it back in the early 2000s. And that nostalgia factor doesn't go away, even though I can acknowledge many things that have been said on the actual podcast about some of the interesting issues with the comics. I still love them. It's not rational. It's just, that's what love is.
Makes perfect sense. Excellent. Tim, do you have any sort of general questions for Richard before we dig into it?
Richard, remind me, just so I can triangulate, are you reading the current IDW G.I. Joe that's wrapping up? Are you buying classified action figures?
I don't buy classified. I'm an O-ring purist. That sounds dreadful, but I am. I'm very much of the old style, and the classified ones I've simply got no space for. They're lovely figures, but I've got no space for them. And I have been reading the IDW, the Larry Hama stuff that's obviously coming to an end soon, but actually I've got stuck somewhere around the end of Snake Hunt. I frankly got a bit bored with it, if I'm absolutely honest. And actually I think things have improved massively since then, so I'm going to try and do a massive catch-up. But yes, I was reading it. I'm very, very much behind on it.
Those self-contained issues that come right after Snake Hunt are a nice change of pace.
Well, yeah, I read those, and I thought they were quite nice. I think that's where his strength, Larry Hama's strengths lie these days, in those sort of small issues about individuals. But not enough hours in the day, let's put it that way. So I'm going to do a big catch-up because I'm massively behind on listening to the podcasts that link to them as well, I have to confess. So a big catch-up basically due. And
you said vintage O-ring, but I'm guessing there's as well that you're a big fan of the 5-point of articulation Palitoy era.
Yeah, I specifically collect 1982 to 1987 Action Force. So that's a very, very specific set of stuff from the old 5 points of articulation stuff that Palitoy released through to the G.I. Joes that were specifically released under the Action Force banner, which means some very nice characters like Lowlight and Chuckles, which weren't released in the original, I don't have because I'm trying to be a purist about it.
Wow. So the likes of CoverGirl, Spirits, they're
don't
to
exist. You. Ton Up was the Wolverine driver.
Right, so we've got Rock and Roll. So Ton Up was the UK release of Rock and Roll, the only one we got in as a Wolverine driver. And on a scale of 1 to 10, how excited are you about Super 7 releasing a 5-point of articulation red laser?
It's kind of weird because obviously that's actually a step back from the red laser we've got. But to see an official figure on card, 11 on a scale of 1 to 10. I couldn't get my wife to understand why this excited me, the idea of an official carded Action Force Red Shadow figure. I actually collect the Super 7 Transformers. I've been avoiding the G.I. Joes, but I'm going to break my habit on this one, definitely.
Cool. Shall we get into Devil's Due issue 42 then?
Yeah.
We're gonna talk about comics from Devil's Due. It's something you wondered if Talking Joe would ever do. I guess we'll explain it all to you. Gonna take some time to read the books we've never read.
So creative team were story Brandon Jerwa, pencils Tim Seeley for part 1, pages 1 to 22, and Emiliano Santalucia, page 23 to 44, which is part 2. Inks Cory Hamscher, colouring Brett R. Smith, lettering Steve Seeley, presumably related to Tim Seeley. Editor Mark Powers, associate editor Mike O'Sullivan, graphic design Mike Norton, production assistants Sean Dove, and military consultation Andrew Swenson.
Let's have a look at the covers in the gallery.
So, Tim, tell us all about what's happening on the front of this here book.
All right, so the cover is penciled by Tim Seeley and inked by Andrew Pepoy and colored by Val Staples. And at the top it says, "The Beginning of the End." And then there's a title under the G.I. Joe logo type, "Dawn of the Red Shadows, Part 1. And in the distance, we can see a small full figure wearing an overcoat, holding two weapons. This person is backlit, so they're all in shadow. And they are casting a shadow toward us. Behind them is a flame, which I have to say doesn't quite read as a flame because all the black outlines have been replaced with white outlines, which is a coloring trick that computer colorists in comic books in the late 90s and early 2000s were sort of getting into. And so the fire to me does look like fire, but from far away it just sort of looks like sunrise or sunset. Anyway, on this arid, harsh ground, barren and dry, all around this figure are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, about 10 Joes, and they're all lying down on the ground, splayed out, eyes closed, weaponless, maybe asleep or unconscious or dead. And the cover, this is not a cover swipe, but the cover does to me recall the Alan Davis, Paul Neary promotional art from the 1980s for the X-Men Fall of the Mutants storyline, which was several chapters in the X-Men books and some related Marvel books. And there are three versions of that piece. There's the original that had the original colors printed as an interior ad, and then there's the like glossy version that's now the cover of an omnibus where it's got like the Photoshop recreation of the original colors. And then there's an omnibus, which is a modern colorist with like rendering and painting, like redoing the colors, not in a limited palette. So when I saw this cover years ago, I thought, oh, it's like the Fall of the Mutants image with a bunch of dead X-Men from close up to the camera, moving back into the distance, just X-Men unconscious or dead strewn across the ground and each other. Notably, in the foreground are Flint and Lady J. Those are the two closest characters. But Firewall is also there. Is this Firewall or Damon? Who died?
Damon died.
Damon died. This is Firewall. Thank you. It's sort of a different cover for Devil's Due. It does ask a question, and the issue does sort of answer the question, right? Who's this mysterious guy? And it is also an exaggeration because some of these Joes aren't in the issue, and not all of these Joes are asleep or unconscious or dead in the issue. But I think the pose on this mysterious shadowed figure in the distance is too straight up and down, too sort of reads as flat. Like this doesn't read like a hole in the page, like a little black dot that you just sort of fall into. But I would like a little more sort of difference between, left side of the pose or right side of the pose, or a little twist to the spine, or, one arm up, one arm down. But in general, I like the cover. It feels like an older fashioned comic book cover, and it is not the style of the 2000, what is this, 2004? Where are we?
We're into 2005 now.
2005, right. This is not the 2005 Marvel covers, which are just like a pinup of Spider-Man or a pinup of Wolverine or a pinup of Storm or a pinup of Iceman.
So now that we know what is happening on the cover, let's get on to the interiors and discover what happened in a plot breakdown with our special guest announcer, Richard Straw.
Cobra have apparently been defeated, but a new enemy has appeared, and one of the first victims is Joe Colton. He leaves a message for the team, telling of his association with British agent Wilder Vaughan, who turned against the governments of the West and who is now in charge of a new terrorist organisation known as the Red Shadows. Colton found a connection between the Red Shadows and the deaths of several G.I. Joe operatives and reporter Hector Ramirez. At the Pentagon, the jugglers find themselves countered by Deputy Director Medina and then confronted by General Mars Herring, who is revealed as a secret plant of the Shadows and guns them all down. The Joes are reunited with the returning Snake Eyes, Scarlet and Duke just in time to join Kamakura in saving the wheelchair-bound Hawk from a Red Shadows attack led by Artur Kulik, an attack in which the Shadows are shown to be resistant to bullets. As Red Shadow attacks continue around the world, Duke and Flint interrogate a bomb maker in New Jersey who may have produced explosives for the Shadows. They are interrupted by Shadows agent Della Eden, who kills the bomb maker and then escapes. However, footage from the attack gives the Joe team a new clue, linking the bomb maker to a company known as Eclipse Holdings. As the investigation continues, Mars Herring turns up at the Joes' offices and secretly sabotages their computers. Meanwhile, there's tension in the Flint household as Warrant Officer and Lady J butt heads over the subject of General Ray. Jay can find nothing on the General's background and doesn't trust him, but Flint disagrees. As Flint storms out of the house, he drops another bombshell. He's intending to quit the team for good. Later, Flint comes under attack from a car driven by Della Eden. Driven off the road and badly injured, he's rescued by Lady J, and the two have a tender reconciliation amidst the wreckage. But just as she is going for help, Jay is stabbed through the stomach by Della Eden and apparently killed. Coming soon, the end of G.I. Joe as you know it.
Dun dun dun. Very well done. Well, I done read a heck a lot of comics. Some of them are great, the team are all on it, but some are a bit cack. They really are whack. Before the nitpicks come out, I'll giving it my bestest, and nothing's gonna stop me from trying to be positive. So I'll pause my scorn to put up 2 thumbs and turn my frown upside down. Take advice, it cannot wait. Say something nice. I'll say something nice. So, as is our new tradition, we'll try and start by saying something nice about the issue. Maybe I'll go first because my say something nice is probably a smaller list. I'll say my thing that I'll say is that when this was coming out originally, my immediate reaction was Red Shadows, cool. As an Action Force reader, I was very excited to see the Red Shadows return to a modern era of G.I. Joe. So I had quite high expectations for this story as a result going in. I might leave it there for the moment. Richard, do you want to step in with your big positive for this issue?
I mean, my big positive, and it's related in a way, is the fact that whilst G.I. Joe and Cobra are utterly intertwined, I wouldn't expect them to be away for long. I am really, really pleased to see them actually fighting something other than Cobra. I think in the original comics, there's maybe 2 stories in that original Larry Hama run. I can only think of 2 issues that don't have any significant Cobra presence. That's just off the top of my head. And I was just... Obviously, as a British reader, I was very excited by the idea of the Red Shadows. But just to have them do something different, successfully or not, that was really good. I was just really pleased to see them trying something different.
Tim?
Well, it's cool that Emiliano Santalucia is back because his facial expressions and his poses and his acting are stronger than Seeley, right? His perspective, like drawing characters in space, foreground, middle ground, background, is strong, and he can draw some different faces that are different from each other. And so the second half of the issue has the sort of visual pep that I've always wanted the Devil's Due series to have, and it's nice that he's back.
Okay. Honestly speaking, I found this issue slightly hard going, and it's difficult to put my finger on exactly why that was. That's not that I was reading it with a scowl and not enjoying it. It's just it felt like a little bit harder work than normal to sort of get through. I guess it's quite exposition heavy. There's quite a lot of captions, dialogue. If you sort of flick through any given page, there's a some of these pages are very heavy on the dialogue. Possibly part of it as well is that it looks like maybe this 2-issue run of 2 oversized issues or double-sized issues could have been originally planned as being just 4 standard issues, because it is literally 22 pages times 4 to get to 2 issues with 2 parts per issue. Seeley is doing half, 22 pages, and Santalucia is doing 22 pages. So possibly that makes it feel a bit strange that maybe this wasn't envisioned as a single issue in itself, but kind of two issues rammed together.
Yeah, I mean, the Seeley's final page, where one of the Red Shadows is saying, "Why Arthur?" I think it was he's British. Why Arthur?
Why Arthur?
I think it was obvious. Divide and conquer, my friend. Divide and conquer. It's a Brooklyn British guy. And it ends with this close-up on the computer screen of Flint separately and Lady J, and that does feel like a dun 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 final moment of an issue. And then the first panel of the next page, where it's now the second half of the issue, and the other artist picks up. It says chapter 2, and the scene feels like it, yes, could have been the first page of the next issue, right? So I contacted MI5 again as per your request, and strangely enough, here's a little. It's not so expositional, but it is expositional. It's not hitting me over the head with stuff I know from earlier in this very issue, but it does feel like something that lightly might call back to an issue published a month earlier.
Yeah,
I think in a very my sort of top down, and I don't know if I can say this. I can't say this affirmatively until the next issue, but my top down 2 reactions are, and this often happens with a final issue and a second to last issue. This feels rushed in that there's a lot of characters and story and sort of big things happening. Someone dies, or someone betrays someone, or someone's revealed. A lot of this is happening in this issue, even though it's a double-sized issue, and that happens in final issues, particularly when a series ends before the writer sort of thought it might. And secondly, I think what I'm seeing here is this is a suggestion that Brandon Jerwa, rather than taking the story that he was trying to do and shortening it a little bit and simplifying it a little bit and squeezing it into 4 issues worth at the end, I think if I were Jerwa with a time machine, I would write a different final story. That it would not be the Red Shadows, or it would not be this version of the Red Shadows. And maybe the Red Shadows would show up, but they wouldn't be the full adversary. And I would sort of refocus this back on the important beloved characters in G.I. Joe and Cobra, with that sort of hope, if this is me as Jerwa with a time travel machine, that maybe I can come back to this in a few years and pick up a thread if the next writer hasn't trashed the place. Because I think what's starting to happen here is this compromise, which is a story that is caught between 2 things: what Jerwa had been planning on and how much space he actually has. And this is not a train wreck. I don't hate this issue. When the Joes nuked Cobra Island, I really didn't like that. It wasn't built up in a way that was realistic, finger quotes realistic, or satisfying. I don't think people reacted to it in the right way. There wasn't any, no pun intended, fallout, although there is a line in here that refers to it. But this issue, I thought, there's a lot of exposition in dialogue and in sort of TV newscaster voiceover. I didn't find this issue emotionally super satisfying. The action was okay. I thought it was sort of tepid and fine. but like nothing about it was terrible, which that sounds mean, but like it's not a faulty comic book. It's just sort of like, well, that didn't like do anything for me, but like it does tell a story, and there are some character beats. Again, this sounds mean. It's like, well, it's not my least favorite issue of Devil's Due. It's like I dislike issues 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. I dislike those intensely. This is like, well, it didn't work, but they're trying, and maybe I'm sort of relieved that now I'm starting to damn by faint praise. Like, thank goodness it's over. Let me hand the mic back to you guys, because I think both of you, because Richard, you said something at the beginning, used a word or both of you used a word or a phrase that sort of surprised me, because I know that you have both been more in favor of Devil's Due stories and art than I have been.
I was going to say, I think you knocked the nail on the head, and it was probably the thought that I was trying to reach, is that I think there was an ambition for this story which was curtailed, and instead of trying to massively rethink an ending for this era, for these final issues to close it out, it was a kind of a compression probably of the existing idea, and that ambition of creating this brand new enemy force and then resolving that entirely within the space of 2 issues is something that's very hard to achieve, and I think that is probably the uphill battle that was being fought as these issues were being produced.
Not to go too far ahead on my opinions on this, but the biggest thing I have with it, really, I think the word I used at the beginning was weird. I mean, I don't know what did Brandon. I'm not really familiar with the background, but did Brandon Jerwa know that basically this was it and he wasn't coming back when they rebooted the series? Because there's just so much packed in. Not always. I generally don't have a problem understanding what's going on in the comics. I think there's been some confusion in the past, and sometimes there has been sort of things that I thought didn't quite make sense. This one, I have struggled following it from page to page at times, because there's so much text. You'd already mentioned the sheer quantity of word balloons. There's one page early on in the briefing scene where you're almost losing the art because of the sheer quantity of word balloons on there. I just wonder how much Brandon Jerwa knew about what was going to happen going forward, because the biggest problem I have with this story, and to jump ahead to the next issue, not only very slightly, is that they resolved the Red Shadow story. They could quite easily have never come back at the end of the next issue, and it just seems to be an enormous amount of material being compressed into, even at double length, a tiny amount of space. It's something you said about the very first issues, that very first arc, which, to be honest with you, I didn't entirely agree with. I thought that was all right, just all right in terms of the pace. But in this, I don't know what it is. There just seems to be so many things going on, and it all ends up a bit weird. Is the only word I can come up with. I will defend Devil's Due to the end of time, and this is not bad at all in any way. And there are lots and lots of things I like in it, but goodness me, it is very strange in places, which is fine. I don't mind it being a bit strange, a bit different. But I'm not quite sure it's really what you'd want for the grand finale of a 3 and a bit years comic run, quite honestly.
My understanding of what happened is that Brandon was expecting to be doing this for a long time, and sort of set out his kind of long-term roadmap of where the story might go over time, sort of trying to plan things out. And then he was told that the book would be ending and relaunched with a new writer. And I believe, given the chance to kind of wrap things up, I don't know how long that notice was, but I suspect that this was the kind of the compressing of an idea or a storyline that you'd probably fallen in love with into a shorter space than it deserved and probably needed. Hopefully we can get to speak to Brandon to kind of wrap up, have a wrap-up discussion of his era and find out a little bit more about how things finished and what that meant for his approach.
So taking what we've just said, right, it's a lot more story that's crunched down into 4 issues. There is so much finality to this. So the jugglers are exposed and they're assassinated. And Herring is revealed as a Red Shadow, as a villain. and the Joes who have been sort of separated or reunited. And specifically, there's some making of peace with General Ray. And the Red Shadows, or at least one of them, that the head guy gets an origin. And there's material showing Flint and Lady J not having a good time, so that when she's stabbed on the final page, it hurts more. And there's these 2 pages of exposition where a bunch of newscasters are telling us of terrorist attacks all around the world in various fictional countries. I haven't read the next issue, but Richard just hinted that the Red Shadows storyline is sort of completed with the next issue, the final issue. And here's an alternate take with my time travel magic wand. Don't have all the jugglers exposed and assassinated. Leave Herring in place. Or maybe the only thing that happens in this story is, rather than like the 5 things or the 6 things that I just rattled, just pick 2. So the jugglers aren't exposed and they're not assassinated. Herring just reveals himself. And maybe the sort of the trio, the head trio, the guy with the gray goatee, the head Red Shadow, and the bald white Russian guy, and the bald black woman, like, they don't do as much in this story. And yes, you sort of leave the reader thinking, oh man, I really like these characters. They're so dangerous and they seem to have such interesting backstories. I wish there were a couple more issues. And then you sort of pretend that like Jerwa can come back one day, in a year, in 10 years, or the next writer will pick this up and maybe, well or not, continue the story. This kind of thing happened all the time at Marvel, where a writer on a book who was on a book for a while would start to plant seeds for a big character turn or a revelation or an origin, and they would leave the book on purpose or get fired. And then a later writer would just sort of do their own take on what might have happened next. And sometimes that got messy, and then sort of a later writer has to clean it up. This happens all over Avengers and X-Men. It would make me more sad if I was really enjoying this book at the time to get to issue 42 and only sort of be teased by 2 or 3 of these Red Shadows characters, but know that one of them was particularly dangerous and well placed. And I'm going to slightly change tack here. My other thought is, I'm so used to, in the larger soap opera of Larry Hama's G.I. Joe, that a lot of characters' pasts overlap. Not all of them, by volume. It's not, there are hundreds of Joes and Cobras, and, like Sci-Fi and like DJ and, Tiger Force, Recondo, like they don't have any relationship to like Destro or the Baroness, but like the core 6 or 10 characters, Cobra Commander, Snake Eyes' sister, etc. And yet here is this 3-page flashback at the beginning of this issue, and surprisingly it doesn't connect to anyone. Even someone sort of off to the side, like, oh, Scrap Iron was on that team, like that sort of was in Vietnam, and or whatever this is, if it's not Vietnam, and like he didn't stay on to become a proto Red Shadow and then an actual Red Shadow. But there could be one scene where he says to Cobra Commander, I think I know who this guy is. And that's a little bit of a shortcut, sort of like emotionally. It's like, then we know that there's a connection, as opposed to just sort of the raw intelligence of Lady J and Flint and Ray, and maybe also Duke, like in headquarters, just like talking about the intel that they've gathered.
It's a narration from a dead Joe Colton that's revealing it. So it's a kind of connection back to the Joes, albeit that he's no longer there.
But Colton isn't...
Colton's the guy with the beard that isn't at Wilder Vaughan.
Oh. Well, egg on my face.
He's one of my favourite characters from Lord of the Rings. Egg on my face. No, it's from Game of Thrones. Egg on my face. Okay, all right. So in the very first panel, the bad guy's on the left, Colton's on the right. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, from a writing standpoint, that is better, and maybe it sort of hurts even more because Colton's not around to tell them this in person. But imagine if rather than the red shadows, there was the red shadow. And it's just this one guy in the flashback behind Colton in the first panel, and not also the Russian guy with no hair and the black woman with no hair, and maybe Herring because he's already sort of been in place, or maybe not. And maybe then you can't make it as big, like 2 pages of terrorist attacks all over the world and also attacks on Joes and Cobras. Maybe it's half of those.
It's not maybe wouldn't maybe be as big, but it would be tidier. And when you were talking about all of those different parts of this story and it just feeling a little bit overloaded, I was thinking possibly some of that global jeopardy stuff of all of these different terrorist attacks happening all over the world. Some of that could be scaled right back down to a much cleaner plot where there's a more singular idea. And so some of the things that we're trying to be got across, like for example that Joe Colton link at the beginning, might be more obvious. One of the things that I don't know if the next issue helps us understand it, but one of the things I didn't still quite get was what was the clear link to all of those deaths that we've been seeing over the past few years. And they've got some of those dead characters pinned up on the board. Clearly the people killing those characters and that we now know were the Red Shadows, but I don't know if the why was particularly made clear.
I can already tell you it's one of the things that always gets me a bit confused. And I've read these comics again and again over the past 20 years or so, and they seem to be the Red Shadows seem to be very cross about Cobra fighting the Joes. And so I can understand why they might want to take out Cobra, which is kind of, they obviously have a talk about the sort of various things that they've unleashed in the last few issues. But the killing of the Joes, I've never entirely got why they're doing that. I mean, they talked about sending a message when they killed Glenda and Rampart, and they'd already obviously killed Big Boa there. It's not at all clear what the message was. The biggest problem I have with the Shadows generally in this is it's not enormously clear what their entire plan is. But no, I'm afraid I have to say going forward, unless I'm missing something very obvious, the next issue doesn't make it any clearer either, quite honestly. Which is a bit unfortunate because the biggest problem I have with the Shadows, like I say, is they're rather nebulous plans, really, because they clearly Brandon Jerwa likes these characters, and he's put quite a lot of thought into creating, particularly Wilder Vaughan, and so I think that's why he wants to get them in there as often as possible, even if maybe it wasn't making an awful lot of logical sense to give them all these big long scenes of Arthur Kulik painting and stuff like that. So he obviously likes the characters he's created, so he wants them in there, but the trouble is they do an awful lot of talking about stuff. They don't really say what their final intentions are, and quite honestly, I don't think it's particularly clear at the end of the next issue either. I think they're trying to make them less obviously we are going to take over the world because we want to take over the world. They seem to have some sort of more idealistic thing gone wrong. But it's not very clear how the Joes come into that, other than we're going to stop the Joes because if we don't, they'll stop us. But they kind of draw attention to themselves by doing that, which is kind of counterproductive, really. But that's always a sort of, what they call it, the idiot ball that the villains have to have at some point. Otherwise, the goodies won't win, basically.
So, what's happening on pages 6 and 7? Who is this? Who approaches the men? Is this a setup for one of the terrorist attacks that the news authorities are investigating? I'm on the next page. Authorities are investigating possible connections between the murder of those American doctors and the assassination of Almini's emir. And the previous 2 pages, the nighttime scene with the woman riding on a horse, is the Almini emirate.
The woman on the horse is Della Eden, the Red Shadow, who normally wears the combat white fur coat. So she's causing trouble. So I think this is kind of the web of terrorist attacks and things, chaos happening over the world. And for whatever reason, she is in the Al Amini Emirates, sort of stoking dissent. So she's sort of ridden ahead of these US physicians on a state-sponsored medical program, and she's ridden ahead of them. Said to the village, the town, that they're enemy US agents there to cause no good, and so stoke them up into a bit of rage so that when they do arrive, they are killed, and yeah, sort of stoking the global unrest that the Red Shadows want for some reason.
I just wonder if maybe, because we've only seen Della literally, is it 2 panels of the previous issue? Maybe, I think you've already answered sort of whether she's easily recognisable. I wonder if these 2 pages might have been better off later in the issue. I suppose you can have she is the woman of mystery causing trouble, and then we learn. But you don't really know who she is, other than unless you were really paying attention in the last issue. And okay, she does rather dramatically appear to shoot Cobra Commander in the face, but that's what it looks like. But I'm not sure everybody would join together who this character is. It's a mystery and it's going to be solved within 10 pages or so. So I don't think it's terrible, but I don't think it's enormously clear either.
I think so. Characters should be allowed to be in disguise or in civilian clothes, and her red Shadows outfit, which is very much a sexy comic book villain outfit. It sort of laterally speaks to the Baroness's outfit, which is a sexy comic book villain outfit that we're all used to in G.I. Joe fandom, but it is sort of subtly more sexy than every other G.I. Joe costume. Anyway, so what's the Red Shadows lady's name?
Della Eden.
Della Eden. So when she has these 2 pages on horseback at night in the desert, so we see that she has dark skin and red lipstick, and there is only one other character in this issue who has dark skin and a woman who has dark skin and red lipstick. But the thing that really says to me that this would be Della Eden would be that she has no hair, and she has a version of her red costume or her actual sexy red costume. And so when comic book characters are out of costume, but they're wearing civilian clothes that are that match the colors of their costume, if I get a visual link, that's fun. I appreciate that. And in context, if she showed up in her normal costume, these men would be very upset because they are religious fanatics, conservatives, right? And they say, "Who are you, woman? Why are you not covered?" Right? And he only wants to see her eyes. So even the fact that she's showing her face is too much. So there is no logical story room for her to have something closer to her costume or her costume. But still, I didn't really know who this was. And so these 2 pages stuck out to me. Let me hand the mic back to Mark, because I think Mark has. I've got 2 Tim Seeley things that I want to pick at.
So the big one for this storyline for me is that initial excitement of the Red Shadows, and beforehand it's being trailed as a big thing. It's the name of the arc, the Dawn of the Red Shadows, and as an Action Force fan, that's very exciting to me. And so,
wait, for the Americans, can you give us the short version? Who are the Red Shadows? Why would a British fan be more excited?
So in the British comics Battle Action Force, the Red Shadows were the main antagonist of the Action Force team. So the sort of proto G.I. Joe team that we had in the UK equivalent version of G.I. Joe. And so that was for the first span of issues, the main villain was the Red Shadows, headed by the villainous Baron Ironblood, the main big baddies. So the likes of us that were reading those comics at the time, it was the equivalent of our Cobra. Well, there was a key storyline in the comics where they made a flip that Action Force was no longer going to be fighting the Red Shadows. It was going to be Cobra, and there was a storyline to explain that the leader of the Red Shadows dissolved the Red Shadows organization and transformed himself into Cobra Commander and was now leading a new organization called Cobra. Story continues. So for the likes of Richard and me, the Red Shadows are a big deal as a baddie. So when this story came out, and we saw here's Wilder Vaughan, he's this this mysterious villain. He's got white hair and a goatee. It's Baron Ironblood. No, it's not. It's this other guy. And it's the Red Shadows. They're these baddies, in red. And they're obviously going to have that iconic outfit of the mask and the skull and crossbones motif, and that instantly iconic, amazing design that they had from the 80s. Oh no, they've not done that. It's just a blank red mask and these guys in fairly nondescript long red trench coats. Knowing what it's sort of for example, just seeing maybe your favorite superhero in the comics and their adventures, and then you see them translated onto screen, and instead of them using their costume, they're just in a t-shirt and a leather jacket or something, and it's you think, we had this iconic thing there just waiting to be used, and you went a different direction, and for particularly the people that knew the source material, a much less exciting direction.
I mean, it's Red Shadows of the old ones, in name only. I mean, I am grateful at the very least that the lead character is British, which is obviously a nod of the head. I mean, I like these Red Shadows. I think they're all right, but they are not the Red Shadows of the original run. I mean, obviously Larry Hama brought them back, and he was aware of the iconography, so we had things like the giant flying skull and things like that. That was really what made them. Whereas this, it's kind of rather like a nebulous organisation that Brandon Jerwa has decided to add the Red Shadows name to. That sounds awfully cynical.
If only there had been one line of dialogue where one of them says something like, we did our training in Britain, and we cast off the founders of our organization. Just a little something for the two of you. Considering how crowded this issue is, it's like, well, if one more line of dialogue wouldn't have hurt.
Speaking, while we're on the Red Shadow track and the British connection, Richard, did you have a point about that very British name that the leader of the Red Shadows has got?
Wilder Vaughan. We have been here before in the Icebound story where an Englishman was called Chuck, which I would never accept. I am prepared to be corrected. I'll be happy to be corrected. But I have never heard of an Englishman whose first name, or a British person whose first name is Wilder. That's, and I say this with no disrespect, Mr. Finn, that's an American, using an American name that I do not believe any British character would ever have. It doesn't fit. It really just doesn't fit.
I'm not sure I have ever heard of Wilder as an American first name, in which case I would sort of send this back to you as, is Jerwa just making up a cool villain first name?
I think that's right.
Like it turns out that Darth Vader, that, Darth is sort of a title, sort of. But, like back then in 1977, Darth was just 5 letters together that meant bad guy.
Obi-Wan does use it as his first name. I think you're probably entirely correct. I mean, if only you'd called him John Shepherd or Marcus Castles, then I might have been more excited, because those are names that do feature in the original Action Force comic for 2 very prominent characters. Wilder Vaughan, I genuinely really like the character of Wilder Vaughan, but he doesn't feel very British to me, whatever they're claiming. That's probably why MI5 and MI6 want to disown him and pretend he's dead. I think he's obviously made the tip of the hat by making him British. But I have said, and I don't know if there's any real time to raise this, I have seen it written down that the 3 main characters of the Red Shadows are a sort of XP, I think the word is, of Cobra La. Wilder Vaughan is Globulus, Gela Eden is Pathona, and the Nemesis Enforcer is Articulic. And it does make me wonder, and it does sort of fit, particularly with Della Eden as the emissary, the sort of herald. It does make me wonder if he had something else in mind, and the Red Shadows just got put over that as a template because they just decided Cobra La was too mad even for Devil's Due.
Richard, are you seeing a coincidence that this trio lines up with Cobra La, or are you or someone suggesting that it may have been purposeful?
I don't know. I mean, all I've seen is I have seen it written down. I don't know if it's ever based on anything that anybody has ever said. That they are based on just that feeling of the characters, just the look of them, really.
Yeah, I mean, but it's Globulus who's
Yeah, I mean,
he's the bald one here, whereas it's the big
that's
guy.
true.
I
mean,
think
Articulic is huge, like the Nemesis Enforcer, and the bald woman. Okay, Pythona's not entirely bald. The bald woman who is the Herald is the is a sort of equivalent of Della Eden. Like I say, it is not my idea. I thought I would simply mention it. It just makes me wonder. I think they did bring Kobalar back, I think, in one of the Transformers crossovers, which makes a lot more sense. I just wonder whether they'd wanted to do that, but maybe somebody had finally said, no more connections to the cartoon series, please. And so they'd gone to this instead and maybe placed this on top of a template for what they were supposed to be. The fact that there's environmental themes to what the Red Shadows are wanting to do also seems to sort of tie in with the Kobalar idea of another world. It's just some speculation I've seen written down. Like I say, not my idea. It just makes me wonder why. Maybe that's why some of it is so decidedly odd and doesn't fit the Red Shadows as anybody who knew the Red Shadows would recognise, simply because it's been lifted and placed on top of something instead.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit here and point out two Tim Seeley art decisions. One is on page 8, where it's the scene where the Red Shadows guy is painting, and in the background, Wilder Vaughn is watching 8 TVs, and TVs are not square. TVs are not as wide as they are tall. I don't mean perfect squares with sharp right angle corners. I mean, these are squares with rounded corners. TVs are 4:3. Like that's a well-known aspect ratio. And this feels, this is a small thing that I'm nitpicking on, but it to me speaks of Seeley's lack of experience in like drawing locations or perspective that are believable. And then a couple pages later, the scene where Miss Medina hands the bad news to General Gibbs. So it's 2 pages, and he's upset, and he says to her, "As much as I enjoy watching you dress up and play soldier, Miss Medina, you don't have the slightest understanding of a true soldier's concerns. I strongly suggest that," and she cuts him off and says, "General, I strongly suggest you go break the news to your cronies in person before I have you put in a cell as well." And then someone off panel, I don't know who, says, "Is it inappropriate to thank you for that?" And General Gibbs is walking somewhere, shaking his fists, and there's a weird black shape behind him, which is technically background, but just reads as like inking. And then
possibly the suggestion of a door.
Right. Yes. This is what I'm getting to. So Gibbs leaves the scene, but I'm not clear on that, because Seeley doesn't draw a proper doorway, or like through the doorway where there's a hallway, and then on our side of the doorway where we're still in the room. Like, I need to see him actually cross that threshold. I need to see 1 or 2 of the other characters in this like full body panel of him leaving. So then Medina's talking to Ray, and I couldn't quite follow the first time that I read this page that Gibbs is leaving the room. And so I thought that she was still sort of talking to him. And when in the final panel, when she shakes Ray's hand, it is clear because of her complexion and her cuff, and his complexion and his cuff. But what this page needs is a 3-shot. We haven't seen all 3 of them together since early on the previous page. And Seeley is, he can establish where characters are. Here he's not reestablishing where they are. And it's only a 2-page scene, so it doesn't like scream for it. It doesn't need it with a capital N. But considering that one of the characters leaves the scene, it's not very clear. And I'm going to jump to, 5 pages from the end? This is not a drawing thing. This is a like colorist thing where Herring is trying to buzz in to see Ray, and Herring he's looking up, I guess, at a security camera, right? Ray identifies himself, Ray, and then Herring says, "Ray, this is Herring. I'm sorry for the late hour, but I'd really like to speak to you. Of course, I'll meet you downstairs in a moment." And this is a pet peeve of mine. On that second, this is a right page if you're holding the comic. On that second to last panel, Ray is looking at a little like security monitor, and the camera is not showing Herring looking up at the camera. The camera is showing a comp of the next panel, which is us seeing Herring from some arbitrary point of view that the artist picked, not higher up and straight down, what the camera would see. And you see this in advertising where, like at my local CVS, there's a billboard in the window, or like a poster in the window, and it's like convenience, savings, and there's like a picture of someone smiling with lemonade, and then like a picture of someone holding like some medicine smiling, and then a picture of someone taking a picture with their phone. And you can see what they're taking the picture with their phone, because it's just a comp of the thing that's right next to them and behind their phone, but that's not the same angle. And that always bothers me.
I'm going to very kindly assume that Herring wasn't looking directly at the camera because he wanted the camera to see his best side. It's the only explanation I've got. I'd never noticed that until now, but yes.
The thing that actually threw me off long before I realized there was too much talking and too many characters and too much story in the issue was how poor the lettering is in this issue. Many of the word balloons, the font is compressed, like the kerning, which is the space between letters, and the leading, which is the space between lines. In many word balloons, it's really cramped and a line is almost touching the line above it or below it. There's a page or two where like the text is sort of too high up in a word balloon. There are a couple, it's like we're back in the first 4 issues. On page 6, in panel 4, there's the letter I as a part of a word, which has serifs, but also on page 11 in panel 2, there are both uses of the letter I within a word where it does or doesn't have a serif. And a lettering rule is that the letter I, if it's the word I, like I myself, has serifs. And if the letter I is in a word like inside or interrogate, then it doesn't have serifs. And I had never seen I've never seen Steve Seeley, right, credited as a letterer in comics.
Well, not in G.I. Joe up to this point. I think this is his first credit.
Yeah, and this sort of looks to me like, hey, can you use this computer program and type these things out and place these word balloons? Like, yes. Have you done a lot of computer lettering before? No. Well, good enough. The lettering in this issue is not good. And it's always hard to letter a comic if there's a lot of dialogue or too much dialogue. But lettering is really design. Lettering is like placing word balloons and sizing everything and deciding how many words go per line so that a word balloon is a certain height and a certain width and it's pleasing. It isn't just like, don't cover the important art. And there is a phenomenon which I see in comic book series where a series is canceled and the final issue or two is drawn by not the artist who was drawing it previously, but someone less exciting, less famous, and I think often less expensive, because the publisher or the editor has sort of given up on the book. So might as well like bang out the final issues and not spend as much of the budget on the issue, because sales usually fall for final issues when a series has been announced. Because if someone doesn't like a book, this is really their excuse to hop off. And I'm being cynical here, but I feel like the normal G.I. Joe reason would be deadline. Like, oh, we need someone to letter this. Hey, you. And I do see from looking at the internet that there is an artist and a comic writer in Chicago named Steve Seeley. And Devil's Due was in Chicago. And so I think this is the same person. And I don't, we haven't seen this name on other Devil's Due comics, and I haven't seen this name on other comics that I've read. So I think this may be like, oh, do you want to try this out? Like, oh, this doesn't work for me. Or like, oh, sorry, you didn't do the best job. We're not going to have you back. But the lettering in this issue was distracting.
No, yeah, I noticed that Steve Seeley on Comic Vine, he's credited on 101 issues, so he's done a lot of stuff, but a fair few of those seem to be linked to Tim Seeley projects like Hackslash. So I assume that there is a familial connection, maybe a brother, and possibly, that was how he got started through that.
I mean, I must admit, I was looking at this morning, and I've never noticed it before. But yeah, page 8, Wilder Vaughan says, Cobra threat, that's something the world need worry about no longer, and it's weirdly up in the balloon. Generally, this sort of thing wouldn't bother me, but I noticed that this morning, and it's messy. It just looks messy. I've read this so many times without noticing it until this morning. So clearly it's not ruined the issue for me, but there's a lot of places where it's not quite right. You're absolutely correct on that.
I also want to, sort of going back to story and writing, there's this scene where Scarlet is driving and Snake Eyes, it's a fun surprise that he's in the back of this SUV holding an M60. And I sort of feel like we've established in G.I. Joe that only a big guy like Roadblock. Oh no, did Snake Eyes have the M60 in the Vietnam flashbacks? Mm-hmm. Okay, I take this back. What I'm really going to say about this scene, this was cool. I like this. She's Scarlet's driving. There's some red shadows behind her. And she says, Snake Eyes, you're up. And he surprises these two bad guys by popping open the back and shooting at this helicopter that they're in. And then the helicopter crashes onto this road. And whoop, 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 wee, chugga, boom. And then the next page, it sort of doesn't look like it's on the road anymore. It sort of looks like it's at the beach or like sort of on a different mountain where there's like dirt and the red shadows are sort of running out of it to like chase the SUV with Scarlet and Snake Eyes. And think about the end of the first Mission Impossible movie where Ethan Hunt, the Tom Cruise character, is on a helicopter that goes into a tunnel so he can jump on a train, and how that scene is all about the danger, this narrow space, like if you navigate wrong, getting into a tunnel, you crash. And here we are on like a mountain road with a helicopter chasing an SUV. And the helicopter lands as if it was going like 5 miles an hour. And I think of Action Comics, other issues of G.I. Joe or issues of like Nth Man or The Punisher or other comic books where a writer and an artist working together. I lay this at Brandon Jerwa's feet because there's no time for the scene to be a cool like action set piece. This is not me frowning at Tim Seeley. I think he drew what was in the script. But man, if a helicopter is chasing an SUV and crashes, I want more. I want more speed and more slamming down and more sort of scraping and like danger. And even if the three red shadows get out of it, I want more. Or this is it's like the abbreviation of the scene. It's like, yep, we took out that helicopter, end scene.
To be honest, the more appalling the crash, the more impact it would have that the red shadows just get out. So yeah, it actually would have helped that as well.
Yeah, and that too.
Mm. Yeah, as a beat as well. It's like that. The helicopter's down. It's in flames. That will be the end of them. And then, yeah, then they've come out. Oh my gosh.
Okay, and this also maybe this is a question for our next episode, or maybe if Richard, having read ahead, can ever so lightly refer to the next issue without spoiling it for me.
Yeah, that's the
so they run out, which I don't understand, because by that point the SUV would have really gotten away and cleared a lot more distance between them. So again, this is like Jerwa's not keeping track of the physical space of this scene, but like, okay, sure, I guess the helicopter like skidded at speed and like maintained pace with the SUV with Scarlet and Snake Eyes. So you turn the page and she says, Snake Eyes, buy us some time. And she shoots them. And then they are like sort of still standing. And Kamakura says, how are they still standing? Those were direct hits from an M60. So there's something going on with the red shadows where where they heal, or they're super strong, or they have armor. And I don't think the rest of the issue refers to this, and I don't think in the previous issues when mysterious people have been killing Joes and Cobra characters that this has been referred to. So, yikes! I hope this gets wrapped up in the next 40 pages of G.I. Joe comics.
It is a fairly significant part of the next comic. I would at least say that.
Okay, cool.
Not being forgotten about. Whether it's satisfactorily wrapped up is another issue, but I better not say anything. I mean, the only reason he catches up with the SUV, I think, is because the SUV is only got to go around the corner and it's Hawk's house. So clearly they've just about caught him by the time they get there. At least that's the explanation I'm going for.
They've not got far to go. Yeah, makes sense.
I think.
There have been times in episodes of the Talking Joe podcast where I refer to the action choreography of a scene as not being satisfying or not being sort of kinetic enough. And sometimes I might refer, like I did here, to Mission Impossible. I might make a movie comparison, or sometimes I might say generally, like, this was handled better in other or different issues of G.I. Joe. And I just want to point out, if you're looking for an example of really good action choreography in comic books, a specific one would be Punisher Annual #1. But it's the Volume 3 series. This is when Rick Remender was writing The Punisher, and Jason Pearson draws this story. The cover is Punisher fighting Spider-Man. And I will actually go out on a limb here and say any Jason Pearson comic book story, his action, his drawing, and he's slightly cartooning when he draws faces and bodies, his sense of like punching and speed and bodies and vehicles and like crashing and like falling. It's really clear and it's really amped up. And so that's when I have called like an action scene truncated or tepid. In my mind, I'm thinking, why can't this look like a Jason Pearson action scene? Okay, so there's my point.
Very good. I was just trying to remember that excellent helicopter sequence from Captain America. I think it was the first issue of Ed Brubaker. I was trying to lean over and grab that.
See, this is the advantage of not really being a major comics reader. I have nothing to which I can make a comparison so that this looks lesser. Quite genuinely. When you've only read a few comics, I mean, a few Jeff Senior bits and bobs, I don't have anything to look at and think, oh, that's not as good as X. I think I'm lucky in that regard.
Some other good Jason Pearson work, his 2 Body Bags miniseries and an X-Force annual. This stuff is really kinetic.
So here's another sequence: is the death of the jugglers, the reveal of Mars Herring.
Red Herring.
Yeah, when we last saw Mars Herring, I wondered whether that might be an allusion to Red Herring. So maybe, it's pointing us in Red Herring, pointing us in the wrong direction. Mars being the red planet, and red. There's the red connection now becomes more obvious. It's a red herring because he is a red shadow. So that definitely works. But in that sequence, there's in a gloopy green back to tank, which we're all too familiar with, Tim, from recent issues of Larry Hama. There is what we, I guess, would think is the Serpentor body floating around. And when we kind of last saw that, I believe they kind of pointed to hinted that perhaps General Ray was going to be Serpentor, that they're going to make use of him, and then out of nowhere comes this charismatic general. But now we're back in that lab. There's a body floating around in the tank, which they kind of point, at least very strongly hint is Serpentor. And then Mars Herring gets out a pickaxe and takes it to the tank to destroy it. And then there's what looks like to be a counting down explosive as well. So it's weird.
I thought they were rescuing it. I thought they were gonna take the body out and like blow up the base behind them.
Talked about getting rid of loose ends. So Serpentor potentially being one of those loose ends that is being got rid of.
People can't have this clone. We're gonna take him with us.
Huh.
All right, yeah, yours makes more logical sense. And then if there's this question of General Ray and Serpentor and cloning, Ray doesn't want to answer questions in the next scene or two about who he is and where he comes from, and that he has. Lady J says, "You have no past." He says, "I can't talk about it." And then he and Duke hug. They don't hug. I find some of the conversation between the Joes in this issue, where people are sort of deciding that Ray is okay after all. I don't know. Doesn't quite work for me.
Yeah, there's a page of talking heads, which is a kind of a bit of a love-in, and then it sort of cuts to Della Eden saying, and this is probably my favourite line of dialogue from the book, "At least they're going to die with their bellies full of warm sentiment." So kind of observing that love-in. But there's a quite jarring bit of just treatment of those dialogue balloons, because panel 1 of that page has got a sort of like a little radio balloon. Let's check in with Jay and Scarlett, shall we? Then there's Della Eden speaking on her mic, and then again, same radio balloon. She's talking to somebody. "Not yet, they're not. Vaughn was clear in his orders, Della." Oh, so that's Mars Herring talking to her. But the first balloon with exactly the same treatment is where she's listening in on that conversation. So it's a little bit more confusing than possibly it needs to be to follow who's saying what.
I think my sort of wrap up thought for this is, I'm fine with the plot of this issue, but the script doesn't work for me. And I don't know if many writers could keep the same plot and simplify it so much so that you could fit it and make it work. But what I mean is, the plot in and of itself isn't like a blinking red light for me. When it actually gets executed, then it's very clear to me that there isn't enough space for all this. And if you are thinking about writing comics, here's an exercise you can try if you're sort of wondering if a page has too much dialogue. Turn to page 35 of this comic, Devil's Due, G.I. Joe 42. It's the page where there are 4 panels, and Duke gets to say, "I'm sorry," and Flint gets to say, "I'm sorry," and Hawk says, "I'm sorry," and Ray says, "I'm sorry." And count the number of words on the whole page, and then go find 2 other comic books that you like. Maybe one's G.I. Joe, if you're listening to this podcast, and maybe one sort of any other comic book you like, and count the number of words on like any sort of random page. And sometimes like this very specific exercise drives so clearly home just how much there is to read in this story. And since it's bearing the weight of a second to last issue, it really sticks out.
I think I get to a page like that, and I think it's quite common as comic readers. A reader gets to a page like that, and there's that much dialogue that you kind of think, there's a lot there. I might just gloss over it, and get the gist.
Yeah,
it's a lot to take in.
And like everyone's, since I have referred to Avengers and X-Men comics in this episode, I will say, like, when I reread older issues of Uncanny X-Men, I only skim or skip the narration because it's very overdone, and it's not meant to be read like 7 issues in a row in graphic novel form. That was written to be read 1 issue and then a whole month later another issue. And like you either forget or it's your first issue. And it's the dialogue that I'm more interested in, and the plot and the character in a Claremont story. But I don't need to be like reminded, like, his name is Scott Summers, her name is Jean Grey, their love across the galaxy, like blah blah blah. I know. It's like no, this is not it's not my first rodeo. So I think I think I give this issue of G.I. Joe not a pass, but sort of a lighter, like, grumpy noise, because I have sympathy for Jerwa that he thought he had longer, and Blaylock writes 2 issues with him recently and then presumably delivers the bad news. Like, we need to relaunch this book with a different writer. And I want to point out that after the final page on the Devil's Due news page, there's a little blurb for the next issue of G.I. Joe after the final issue, which is going to G.I. Joe, the headline, G.I. Joe restarts with 25-cent issue to celebrate the start of a brand new chapter, 25 cents. Joe Casey, Stefano Caselli, and Sanjay Raj lead our soldiers onto an all-new battlefield perfect for new readers without losing any of the rich history that's come before. And it often turns out you actually can't do both. It often turns out that that's just copy written by a copywriter. That if you have this new G.I. Joe series, the new writer, yeah, technically the rich history still counts and it's still there. But like, I bet you the first 8 issues of the next series by Joe Casey does not refer to almost anything that happened in the Devil's Due run and refers to very little or anything that happened in the Larry Hama Marvel run. And so this is a publisher trying to have it both ways. And I don't say that cynically, because maybe comic books need to do that, be accessible to new readers and also, sort of keep established readers in mind. So I have a lot of sympathy for Brandon Jerwa here, because it's no fun to be told you're canceled. It's no fun to be told you have much less time than you think, space than you think, to wrap up your story. So
it's the dream, though, isn't it, Tim? They want to go right. All of the people currently reading the books, don't leave. You're gonna keep on enjoying it when we relaunch it, and new people, it's gonna be super accessible and really good for you too. So jump on board.
I would be interested. Maybe we should put this at the beginning of our next episode. I would be interested to hear from our listeners on Facebook, on our what's the voice memo thing? Voicemail?
Yeah, there's a voicemail facility at the bottom of the talkingjoe.co.uk website.
I would be interested to know from our listeners, when the Joe Casey book started, had you been reading the Devil's Due series, and did this feel like a continuation? Did you stop reading because now you were disappointed? Right? Like, well, I don't want to read the new one. That's like kind of starting over. Or did you come to the Joe Casey series having not read The Devil's Due? And if we could get a large enough sampling, I feel like we could make a reasonable sort of mathematical assumption of what the entire readership does. But, is this a jumping? Certainly this is a jumping on point for new readers, because I jumped back on with Joe Casey. But, for a Mark or a Richard, not the version of you two that are like on podcasts and obsessed with G.I. Joe, but for the sort of normal versions of British G.I. Joe fans, American G.I. Joe fans like you guys.
Not you two weirdos, the normal fans.
No, I want to be on a podcast with weirdos.
Just as well.
But was anyone how many of our listeners?
Congratulations.
How many of our listeners read issue 43 and then stopped? Like, does this? How much does this kind of thing potentially backfire?
I mean, it's obviously jumping ahead, but I will say, I wouldn't necessarily want to put on your bet about how much continuity there is between the two series. I don't want to spoilerize it, but the nearest I ever came to leaving Devil's Due was about the first year of America's Elite. Let's just put it that way. I persevered, but it was not without its struggles, shall we say.
I remember my reaction was somewhat like, hey, I was enjoying that. Why are you getting the new person? Yes. So before we wrap up with this issue, I think it's probably worth just pausing briefly on the main emotional beat, that sort of action sequence with Flint, Lady J, and Della Arden at the end. There's kind of, tumultuous relationship, Flint and Lady J. In the very last panel, Lady J has had something, a shard of metal or glass perhaps, stuck in her stomach, and it looks like all is not well. Did that hit the right emotional beats for you guys?
I suspect I'm going to be somewhat out of sync with everybody else here, because I like it when they... do I want to spoilerize? I like it when they kill or apparently kill Joe, because it's war and people die. And I think if you're going to kill, we've killed a load of irrelevant characters in the last few weeks. If you're going to kill somebody, it needs to hurt and it needs to be somebody significant. And so I really like this, and I appreciate that's probably a minority opinion.
If she's dead, and I do think you generally shouldn't kill characters, I do think this scene is well done, and there's an attempt earlier in the issue to give them some emotional space so that when this happens, they haven't shown up for the first time out of nowhere in a long time. Here's my nitpick, actually. They're not in costume, and it sort of doesn't look like Flint to me unless he's wearing his beret, and it sort of doesn't look like Flint to me unless he has his shirt and his ammo and his camo. And there's an episode of the cartoon from '86 from season 2 called Gray Hairs and Growing Pains, and it's really silly, but it's still good, where some of the Joes get turned old and some of the Joes get turned into kids. And I already couldn't tell who was who, because in this episode they're at a Cobra Run fitness club, and they're all just in like workout clothes, and they are not color matched to their character costumes. So it's just some Caucasian guy with brown hair and like Scarlet. Like I definitely know who Scarlet is, or Lady J, right? It's like, okay, she's got short brown hair. I know that's Lady J. And the bald white guy, that's Gung Ho. But the other ones, I don't know who it is, because it's like, well, if it's sci-fi, he's got that RoboCop helmet and a neon green jumpsuit. And if he's just wearing like blue pants and like a beige sweatshirt, I don't know who it is. And then you'd say, well, Tim, what about their voices? Like, well, yeah. Anyway,
there's that episode Flint's Vacation as well, where he's on vacation and he's still wearing his beret, isn't he?
Yeah. Also, in that episode, that's just one Joe in his civvies, so I definitely know that's Flint, because Flint goes on vacation. They keep calling him Flint. It's called Flint's Vacation. It's not like Flint's Vacation has like 7 other Joes in their civilian clothes. So rather than like, I don't like this scene, don't kill Joes, I think this scene's okay. I think this scene, how about this? I wish they were in costume. I think my any problems I might have this scene are superseded by my other challenges with this storyline being overcrowded and wrapping up quickly. So if it's like, you've committed a cardinal sin in the Tim Comics canon, like don't kill characters, or like it should be someone that I know better, like Destro or Cobra Commander, who kills Lady J. Since there's already so much going on, it's like, yeah, sure, okay.
I like your use of the superseded word there, because I feel like Lady J's death has got more heft here because it has been superseded, as in they have been seeding, the emotional beats in a super way through the issue, so that it has more heft when it happens. It hasn't, it isn't just this extra bit that's been tacked on out of the blue, where she's introduced on panel 1 and killed in panel 2. There is more impact to it from the fact that she's a key character who has been playing a significant role throughout the last few issues and has been having these emotional scenes with her husband, but particularly in this issue.
That's why I think them not being in costume actually works. I mean, on the last page they call each other Allison and Dash, and they're not being Flint and Jay. And that's the whole thing about it. It actually goes back to the very, very first issue of The Devil's Due, where Flint calls Lady J and actually says, he calls her Allison, but then says, I'm calling you as Flint. And it's not been done in all the issues in between. But this is where they have this idea of the tension of what it would be like to have a married couple serving in a unit like this, and that tension. I mean, it would have been boring doing it every week, but I quite like the idea that this is them being themselves, but they are still in this appalling level of danger, which is so why I quite like the fact that they're not the regular agents in the regular situation where they would get killed. He's just going for a drive. They've had a domestic, and then this happens. So actually, I really do think this works because they're not being Flint and Jay. So, but that's just my take. Yeah.
No, that's a good point, and very nicely done, tying this back to issue 1.
And then as we turn out, I quite like it when things get over emotional in G.I. Joe, as we have seen with my protests about not worrying about people crying in the last few weeks, so I quite like this sort of thing.
I did have a moment in this issue where early on where they're arguing, and I thought, is this scene going to get the J. Cordray Award for the J. Cordray Tim Finn Award for like slightly unnecessary, over emotional female Joe in a Devil's Due scene? There is something that we keep saying about this issue that I haven't properly congratulated, which is this is a double-sized comic book. And it keeps seeming like a bad thing, like there's too much story even for this double-sized comic book. I love double-sized comic books. I love double-sized first issues, final issues, anniversary issues, second to last issues. What a treat. Like, definitely this was going to be 4 issues or 4 issues, or, Jerwa was going to do 8 or 20 issues. And Blaylock said, okay, the most I can give you is 4 issues worth, but we needed to end on this date. So let's do 2 double-sized final issues. And I think editors in comics have stopped making double-sized final issues because that just makes sales go down even faster. Because if you don't like the series and its sales are slipping, you will definitely drop the book if the final issue is that much more expensive. Maybe in 2022, this is a little bit different with variant covers and like rarity, because a final issue, if it's not selling a lot, I can get the rare variant. And I'm not speaking of G.I. Joe 300, I mean in general. But I love the heft of a double-sized issue. I can't think of another series which had not only a double-sized final issue, but a double-sized second to last issue. So even though there's too much going on here, there is an attempt to give me the reader, closure and excitement.
I spy with my little eye.
Shall we have a look at a few I Spies?
Yeah.
Richard, do you want to start? Did you spot anything?
I really struggled with this one. Other than my obvious thing that I do think that Wilder Vaughan, despite everything, is meant to be Baron Ironblood. There's a reference, Hawk and Ray are having a chat, and they talk about a chase with an ice cream van and a pink Cadillac.
Oh, yes.
And I'm kind of thinking, is that something that I've missed? So it's more that I don't spy, because I couldn't remember what on earth this is referring to.
This is referring back to an early issue of G.I. Joe. I think it's round about that issue with Major Blood on the front cover.
Doesn't there's an ice cream truck in 93.
It's obviously gone completely over my head, and I was just looking at these issues recently.
While Mark's looking,
here we go. It's around about I think it's around about issue 16, 17 that there's a sequence there. I'd have to go back and look to it for sure, but I think it's round about then that this sequence that they're talking about happens, where we've got an ice cream van.
I mean, that was the only major thing I noticed, was a sort of back reference.
No, good shout. I could I spy an absence of Cobra, and normally I'd be featuring, sort of calling out all of the new characters and figures that we've got featured, sort of relating back to the toy line, and very very little in the way of G.I. Joe characters, Cobra characters, and vehicles.
I've got 2 I Spies that aren't really I Spies. On page 27, this 2-page spread of all of the newscasters. On the final panel on page 27, there is an African-American newscaster in a jacket and tie with short hair and a mustache. And I don't know who this is, but I feel like Santalucia is drawing a reference photo of someone he knows or a news person or an actor. And I feel like I'm seeing Richard Pryor, but that might be arbitrary. And now that I've said it, you can't unsee it. So, and then my other sort of I Spy is Spirit Iron Knife in his Snake Eyes cosplay costume on the cover. But in general, a couple of Joes on the cover who aren't in the issue. Shipwreck, Lifeline, Stalker, Gung Ho. Who's the guy sort of next to Flint?
Grand Slam.
Grand Slam. Thank you, Grand Slam. Right, because his costume becomes dark gray in the Devil's Due run.
Yeah, and I think the cover was sort of created as a one of these Joes will die type trails. So hence the sort of scattering of characters.
It is an appalling tease, that cover. Quite honestly,
I'm fairly sure that there was probably some sort of promotion along those lines.
Well, we did see in a previous issue there was a bunch of rectangular headshots of Joes. There was like an inside back cover in an issue or two ago,
yeah,
which showed like a bunch of head and shoulders of Joes and Cobras, and I think it did say one of these characters will die.
right.
Actually, I know we're in the middle of one of our games, but I did have a question about this issue, which I wasn't sure about, and maybe I just didn't read it carefully since I already completely missed that Colton is in the flashback at the beginning. But anyway, on page 33, it's right after Flint chases the assassin, right? And there's this action scene of like jumping down the fire escape of this building. So we're back at Central Operations Center, and we see all this computer equipment. And this is before that page that I slammed for just being too much talking. So in the final panel, Ray is saying to these other three Joes, if the three of you would like some time to talk alone, I can start chasing paper on Della Eden. And then Duke Hawk says, I don't see any reason why you should have to exclude yourself. And Ray has this body language, which is really good acting, but I feel like it's out of character for him and too much for the moment, where he's got his hand like on the back of his head, like he's nervous, like, oh, I'm intruding. You guys are having a moment. I should get out of here. Mm-hmm. And his other hand is pointing as if pointing to the door. And I feel like this one line of dialogue is completely out of character for him. And maybe this is part of this overall thing where this issue, the story is rushing things. It's like Ray's been a hard ass, but now he's coming around to the Joes, and now the Joes are coming around to him. But I actually didn't quite understand from a writing perspective why Ray would offer to excuse himself. Like, am I missing something?
Other than it, I guess it gives the in for the next bit of dialogue where they all sort of say that they've come around to him and, don't worry, you're one of us kind of thing. Just to create an in for okay. That. It does seem out of character, but by saying...
So what you're saying is it's forced?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think they're trying to get over the idea, Ray, he's almost too good for words, really. Now that's kind of the whole point. Even though he's been tough and nasty, he's only ever obeyed orders. And now that that's happened, he's so nice. So they can all have their lovely warm loving, and it's only nasty, suspicious Lady J who's being horrid to him.
Right, and then
all boys together.
Typical woman.
And then she gets her comeuppance for not believing in Ray. Right? If you don't believe in Ray, you might not make it out of the story alive. Did you have other ARAH detectives or I Spies?
I had a final I Spy, which was this big guy ARAH, and on his Red Shadow outfit, he's got a skull and crossbones, which is a callback to the original Red Shadows. And I believe that I saw a quote from Brandon Jerwa somewhere saying that he had kind of planned for these Red Shadows to be very different to the original Red Shadows, and didn't want the skull and crossbones motif included, but that Tim Seeley snuck it in regardless. And staying on ARAH, he says Tovarich to what's his face, that to not bite around Ironblood,
to Van Wilder
and Gene Wilder, whatever he's called. And yeah, that obviously means comrade, and I know this because I read X-Men comics with Colossus in them, written by Chris Claremont, which means that we know that ARAH must be Russian. That was it for me. I had a kind of I Spy / ARAH Detected. It's a bit of an unfair ARAH Detected because it's not an error per se, but it was a sort of thing that made me think, ooh, that doesn't feel right. Which is in that beginning sequence, the flashback with the origins of Van Wilder, that he talked about this is Joe Colton narrating, that he's talking about a UN sponsored strike team, and I thought, oh, that doesn't sound right. UN forces are always deployed as peacekeeping forces, so kind of having an offensive strike team just didn't feel like it rang true to real world.
I might point out that Action Force were a UN-sponsored strike team.
Okay.
So, that's just probably a complete coincidence.
All right, you two Brits, I want you to fight.
That is a good no prize counter argument. I'm glad you came back with that.
Quote of the week, quote of the week, quote of the week, quote of the week,
Quote of the week, quote of the week.
quote of the week.
Did we have any favourite line of dialogues that we've not talked about before?
The dialogue is very functional. There's so damn much of it. I've searched through to find stuff. Now, you've already mentioned one that I did like, which was the belly full of warm sentiment. Other than that, there is a couple of lines that I do like, if you don't mind.
Go on.
Deputy Medina's, I contacted MI5 again as per your request, and strangely enough, they still insist Wilderborn is dead. So unless you can prove he's either Jesus or a zombie, I don't think we have much of a case. I don't know, I just like that line. And more later on, Flint has a line, Ray could have Elvis Presley in a plastic storage tub under his bunk, but if we don't have a need to know, even I'm smart enough to realise we can't do anything about it. 'Cause that's just weird.
Got to give Flint some color before we put him through the emotional ringer.
Mm-hmm. His
at the end of
last
the issue.
ever joke. Let's.
I didn't have any. No lines stood out at me, but I do like the two that Richard just picked.
Yo, cola, not grape soda.
It's Joeage time.
Do. Yeah, yo, Joeage. I'm almost a little bit scared. Let's start with Richard, and then we can go to sending order.
I mean, I still like this. I still like this issue. This is, what's that phrase? This is not your father's Red Shadows. But I do like the Red Shadows as they exist. Yes, it is massively overloaded. You will spend half your life trying to read through all the dialogue. But I will still give it a 6. A 6 to me is a decent mark. This is not a J6 where it's quite bad, because I still think there's a lot of excitement in here, and I like the fact that it's attempting to do something different. The biggest problem with the Red Shadows is the waste of potential.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the fault of this specific issue. This issue is downright strange, but my life is not worse off for reading it, so I'm still going to give it a reasonable 6.
That's very reasonable commentary and score. And now, talking to the unreasonable man, here's Tim Finn.
4. It so much happens, and there are emotional beats, and yet at the same time, it just sort of flies right past me. Because it is trying to do too much. Sort of not until the final page, the final 2 pages, the second to last page, where Lady J kisses Flint, and he's really hurt, and I thought, oh crap, she's about to get killed or something. So 4, but 4 with my sympathies.
Good, and a bouquet of flowers. I think I'm going to go in the middle, 5. I completely get what both of you are saying. For me, it just felt a little bit overloaded, a little bit too much on the dialogue heavy, a big bit of just disappointment at the potential of what I think the Red Shadows could be, knowing my nostalgia for the Action Force brand. So that's about where I am. It's not necessarily not a bad comic per se, but somewhat harder work than maybe it needed to. Than I would have liked it to have been, and with a tinge of disappointment of what I would have liked the Return of the Red Shadows to be. Cool. So that is us done with 42. We will be back with the next Disavowed episode looking at the grand finale to Brandon Jerwa's era on the G.I. Joe regular monthly with issue 43, part 2 of the Dawn of the Red Shadows, another double-sized issue. Will it wrap everything up in a satisfying way? We shall find out then. And then over on the other side of the stream for Talking Joe, we cover the regular Real American Heroes issues written by Larry Hama as they come out, and more besides. We have also got a special guest interview coming up, which is related to the Disavowed era, so keep an eye out for that one, and all sorts of fun and games besides. Richard, have you got anything that you would like to plug?
Unless anybody wants to see Victorian operetta in North East England, no, I'm absolutely fine, thank you.
I think you've got your target audience right here.
Oh, yeah. No, I was on Twitter, but then I got bored with it, and so I left Twitter.
Oh, right.
No, you won't be able to find
that was
me
a brief flash in the pan. I noticed you on Twitter.
Well, lots of people arguing, and I was getting dragged into it, and I thought, oh, no, enough of this. So, no, you can't find me unless you know where I live.
Very good.
There we go.
Tim, where can people find you?
Video essays on TV and film at our YouTube channel, Atomic Abe Productions, my brick and mortar comic book store in Somerville, Massachusetts. And I write about G.I. Joe at arealamericanbook.com.
Excellent. You can find out more about Talking Joe on the website, which is talkingjoe.co.uk. We have a Facebook group. Or on Twitter, Instagram. You can leave us a voice note. We're also on Patreon, patreon.com/talkingjoe. A big thanks to all of our backers, who include Richard, Sam, Jay, Bill, Christopher, Justin, Rob, and Brian. They're all getting early access to episodes as well as exclusive content. As a completely impartial observer to that little announcement there, Richard, do you have any views on Talking Joe on Patreon?
I like it. I'm not going to say any more than that.
There's voice of wisdom.
I don't think that will help.
So that is us done, I think. But remember, actually, as someone who does operettas in the north of England, if you want to just warm up your vocal cords, Richard, do you want to do the outro here? And that's us done. But remember,
nobody beats Talking Joe, an international podcast.
Oh dear. Laters. Thank you, Richard.
Oh, sorry.